Let me introduce our guest, Tim Goldstein. Tim is a technical trainer at a major tech company and a communication consultant. He has decades of experience in the IT field as well as running entrepreneurial ventures. Tim has extensively consulted with many leading corporations and organizations regarding best practices to make workplace inclusive of neurodistinct individuals. He serves on many advisory boards, including Autism Society of America. He is an excellent advocate and was recently also recognized by his peers to be one of the top 50 Global Neurodiversity Advocate. He is author of the book Geeks Guide to Interviews. And related to this, our discussion today will focus on job interviews for neurodistinct individuals. So, Tim, welcome. We
Well,
are
thank
so
you.
happy to have you here. And now, without much ado, I will hand over the floor to you for your presentation on job interviews for neurodistinct individuals.
Well, thank you very much. So happy to be here. Let me share my screen. We have some slides to go along with the presentation. So hopefully everybody can see the slides now. So starting out with, we're going to be talking, as Mary said, getting employed for the neurodistinct and talking a little bit about what's important, what isn't important, what employers want. And the basis of how I came to the conclusion on all this stuff was, like many autistic individuals, I was fired a lot of times. And if you get fired a lot of times, you have to interview a lot of times. Fortunately, in my background, I also did a lot of sales back in the early parts of my career. And I recognized that interviewing was a sales process. And I got to the point where I think in one time when I was looking for a job, I got 14 offers in a row. So I was fairly successful at interviewing. So hopefully we can hit some points that will be helpful. The nice thing about this is these aren't things that work only if you are neurodistinct. These are things that work regardless of who you are. They're just good interview pieces, but they're critical pieces if you're neurodistinct because usually you're struggling a little more to connect with the interviewers. So, got an introduction, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on introducing to me other than I was diagnosed at 54. So I was a late diagnosis, which is very common for people basically above about 35, because we all got out of school after school started recognizing how to diagnose and recognize kids that had different neurodistinct conditions, which means the majority of my work career was all done not knowing I was autistic. My actual working premise was the world was stupid. Not necessarily an effective working premise, but that's kind of the conclusion I came to, because if I could see it and they couldn't, what other conclusion will you reach? What I realize now, though, is it's not that the world is stupid. There was a total communication mismatch. It's as if we were just talking two completely different languages that sounded the same but didn't mean the same words. And that really is where the breakdown came. So just quickly, what we're going to go through is what does the employer want to hear? That's something very important in interviewing is you've got to know what they want to know about. Telling them what you want them to hear, if it's not what they want to hear, is not going to be effective. Then talk a little bit about communication and what you should put into your communication and what you might be able to take out to be better at communicating in an interview situation. And then lastly, stories being your best offense and defense. So in other words, how to use stories, how to answer questions in a way that will relate better to the interviewers and give them a more complete understanding of who you are and what you can actually bring to that organization. This is one I just like to start out with because it's a good demonstration to set the stage. When you look at this, different people will see different things. And some of you will probably see a frog, and some of you will probably see a horse. And the answer is, you're all right. There is both a frog and there is a horse in there. If you want, the frog is really just up in the upper yellow part. The horse the frog is the face of the horse, and the mane is down in the blue part. But how is it we can both look at the same picture and some of us can see one thing and some of us can see another? Well, that is just human perception. And that is one of the challenges that you face in an interview is the interviewers are perceiving things likely different than you are. So you have to explain it in the terms they perceive it through, not the terms you perceive it through. If we were talking about this picture and telling them all about the land of frogs, and they were looking at the horse, they would think that you're probably not a good candidate because you're obviously not seeing what's in front of you. So I think that helps just set the stage of remembering that everybody has their own unique perspective, and it can be as different as the two images in this picture. So one of the most important things that I think to interviewing is understanding what it is that the employer really wants. And where this came out of was when I went to write my Geeks Guide to Interview book, I sat down with some of my tech geek buddies. I'm pretty sure one of them was autistic, looking back on it. This was before I had been diagnosed, actually. And another one, maybe not. Third one, definitely neurotypical person. And when I asked them, what's your biggest challenge that you have when you interview? What do you feel is your biggest challenge to to the interview? And what they agreed on was their biggest challenge was getting all the people they interviewed with to understand how technical they were. Unfortunately, when you look at this little picture, you can say just, job description, and you can see there's all different aspects that they want to know about you. And the yellow one up in the top corner, if it's a technical job, is your tech skills. So the tech skills are only a little piece of what they want to know. Why were my buddies not effective at interviewing? Because they were telling people that could care less about tech skills. They're telling the HR person about how technical they were, and the HR person doesn't care. They're not technical. They don't understand that stuff. They don't have to. That's not their job. So they were saying the wrong things to the wrong person. When I went back and did the interviewing with the recruiters, the HR people, the hiring managers, I would ask them a question. And the question was basically, if you have somebody that is fully qualified for the job, in other words, technically they're completely qualified, they've got the background, the experience, all of those things, why did they lose the job offer? And the number one answer was the person didn't express enough interest and excitement for the job and the company. So here I've got buddies that are trying to convince them how technical they are, and what wins the interview most often is showing them that you really want to work there. You can see big disconnect between the two. And that leads us to our next slide, which is emotions. And I'm convinced that emotions are actually how human instincts speak to us. We don't think of ourselves as having instincts, but I'm convinced we do. Why would we be the only things on the planet that are living and breathing that don't have instincts? I don't think they disappeared. We just have this layer of cognitive processing above them that we may not recognize them. But I think they speak through instincts. And that is where one of the problems comes in, is emotions and instincts work together. So when somebody is coming across in an emotional manner that does not convey the right things, it's going to trigger instincts. So if you speak in a monotone and you sound really boring and just never get excited, the instinct is this person is disconnected and I better be leery of them because they're really not connected up with me very well. So that is a kind of an interesting way to think about it. If you think about it, that the instincts that caused us to become humans and form civilizations really all work through emotions. You have to remember, you've got to work with the emotions of the person that you're interviewing with, not just the facts. Yes, you need to give them the appropriate facts, but you also need to wrap them into the emotional context and sounds that are going to trigger the emotions of, oh, I want to be around this person. This person seems like they can bring something to the group and make us stronger. So that's a quick part there. And I'm going to go pretty quick through these slides because we're going to have a lot of time to talk and ask about questions and such. So I'll just cover them lightly here, and we'll dig into the specific areas that you want to know more about when we go into the Q&A area. So what is the goal that you really want to do when you are doing an interview? The goal really is to make them start dreaming of when you're going to start coming in. In other words, you want to make them think, oh, wow, this person is going to be exactly what we need. They're going to do such a great job. Oh, I just can't wait till they get started. And how do you go about doing that? Again, you use the least amount of words. So you don't have to be wordy. You don't have to say huge amounts. But the trick is you have to have emotion in them. You have to have the emotion of excitement. You have to have the emotion that you want to be there, that you have desire. You have to convey the emotions that you will be respectful, that you will be a good member into their team. So there's a lot of things that you're really trying to convey, but they're all at the emotional level, not at the word level. So that's part of the trick, is wrapping your words with emotion. And how do you do that? Well, we call it music for the most part. When you think about it, emotions are transmitted through tone, through tonality. Excitement has a sound. Being respectful and thankful, that also has a sound. So there's different sounds that are conveying different emotions. So we want to be careful about the sounds we're using. And probably the worst sound, and this one's most common in the technical engineering, all those kind of areas of the world, is monotone sounds. Because monotone sounds are really saying, I'm not very excited. I'm not very excited about you. Matter of fact, I'm not even very excited about interviewing. I'm just kind of detached from this whole thing. And that is not going to win an interview by any stretch of the imagination. Even though companies try to make interviews as unbiased as they can, it's humans that are doing interviews. Humans are primarily motivated by emotions. So while they're not saying they're rating you by your emotions, they really are, because that's just how humans work. No matter how detached we try to be, we still have these emotions that are shaping our thoughts and our impressions of things. So how to answer questions. This is another big important piece, is how do you answer questions when you're asked questions? There's a number of things. One thing I always like to start with is assume the person asking the question has the lowest level of interest possible. I do a communication presentation where I talk about there being 3 different levels of interest. I call it the 3 degrees of interest. And you can think of it as being, one would be at the party. Next one would be you're planning to do something with somebody at the party. And the 3rd level of interest is you're actually going to do it. Well, at the party, if somebody says, what do you do? They just want to know enough that they can pigeonhole in your brain what it is you do. On the other hand, if let's say they're asking about what's your favorite hobby, well, they don't want all the details, they just want it. But if they then say, geez, it would be fun to get together, now you want to talk about more details of it. And if they finally say, geez, let's go start a company and do that together, now we're deep into the details. So always start with just the highlights, the basic minimum amount. And then what you do is, after you give the basic highlights, somebody asks the question of, for instance, tell us about something that you feel is one of your major accomplishments at work. And you say, I worked on this one project where I went and made the decisions of who would be on the team and how we would approach the problem. And it worked out really well. And I was really excited to be able to do that. Then you ask them the question, does that cover what you're looking for, or do you want to know more? So you're showing emotional intelligence. which for us autistic people, it's not normal for us to sense that. But by simply asking that question, they now feel as if I have this great emotional intelligence. And very often they're going to say, perfect, that answered what I wanted. But if not, what they're going to say is, not quite what I really wanted to know. And now they're going to give you very detailed what they really are specifically looking for. So by starting at the lowest amount, just giving them the basic and asking, do you want to know more, will position you the best versus running on about a particular topic for way too long. They don't need to get to know something as well as you know it. When you're in a specific field, you tend to know that field deeply. And you're not trying to teach them to be at your level. You're trying to answer their question, which is not usually in that deep, deep level. Now, there usually is some phase in an interview where they are going to check those things. That is the only time that you would talk at the deep level, is where they're really evaluating, do you have what, at the company I work for, we call it role-related knowledge. There's the only time that you're going to go deep, but you're working on the role-related knowledge part of the interview, so you know that they need those deeper answers. Not longer, but deeper and more specific. And I always say best way to explain things is, would a 10-year-old understand what you're saying? And if a 10-year-old would understand it, then you probably are answering at the right level, unless it's that role-related knowledge area. Another thing is limit brain dumps. You just can't go on and on and on and on. That doesn't achieve much. Connects to another tip I have in here. But if you think about it, if you take, let's say, 10 minutes to answer one question, most interviews tend to be an hour, and then there's an introduction and a little time to answer questions at the end, you basically have your whole interview experience based on 5 questions at that point. Wouldn't it be better to answer them in 2 minutes and have your interview experience based on a whole lot more questions and a whole lot more areas? I certainly think so. So don't go on and on. Think sound bites. People want to hear sound bites that are going to stick in their mind and say, oh, yeah, that's the candidate that said, and you said something short, sweet, and real memorable. So that is another piece to just think of. Keep the answers down short. Every answer is not writing an encyclopedia. Most answers are simply short, quick answers. Everybody likes a story. We've been taught in business, we've been taught in education, we've been taught in lots of areas that the best way to connect and communicate with people is through stories. And there's actually a format for a story. It's actually very simple. Relate to something specific and tangible. So in other words, give an actual example. When they say, tell me a time that you worked with somebody and there was a disagreement. Come up with an actual example of when you did have a disagreement with somebody. Okay, I was working at this company and we were doing this project and we couldn't agree on the best way to do it. And then give your involvement in the alien's ways and words. Where that comes in is, I think all of us, for the most part, and if you're neurodistinct, you're even more so, are really an alien. You're a different culture than the people who are often interviewing you. So you can't say it in the words that express it to yourself. You've got to say it in the words that express it to the interviewers, to the audience. So if they're not technical people, you have the recruiter and the HR person is the one that's doing the interviewing part. They don't know technical words. They don't know your PhD area of study. So don't use the PhD words on them. Use the more common colloquial versions of the word so that they can relate to them. Because if you talk too high level, it feels like you're talking down to them. And nobody wants to hire somebody that is going to talk down to you. Then tell them what you learned or liked. So let's say, again, that scenario, you had a problem. Well, I had a problem with this other person. We couldn't decide. They thought they had a better idea. I thought I had a better idea. So I went to my manager and asked the manager if we could meet with them and help solve the issue. What I learned out of that was I have lots of resources that can help me when I run into challenges dealing with other people. And by utilizing them, I can become much more effective. So in other words, not only did you tell them the problem, but you also told them that you learned from it. You learned a new way to apply it. And then at the end of it, you just summarize it and you say, and what really the benefit of all this is I learned how to leverage those resources so that when I come into any organization, I'm much better at working with a whole range of people because I now realize there's lots of other resources to help me work with them when I do run into challenges. And that's a story. It's a real life thing, so it's easy to relate yourself to it because you actually lived it. The only difference is you've got to put it into a format of this is what it was, this is what I did, this is what I learned out of it, this is why it's a benefit to you as a company to have me because of that. And again, put it in their terminology. 2-minute rule. Already alluded to this one. I believe you should never talk in an interview more than 2 minutes before you stop and say, did that answer your question? Or is there something else that you would like to know? It's a winner every time. They usually will go, hallelujah, they stopped talking. Good. Yep, perfect. Let's move on. Next question. But sometimes they will not, and they will say, no, you didn't quite answer what I wanted. What I really wanted was, and they'll explain what you wanted perfectly. So 2-minute rule is a major winner to use when you're interviewing. Oh, didn't realize I had a slide where things dropped in. So yeah, the second slide I just jumped over really was, I talked about it in the first slide. Recruiters. I am a big believer in using recruiters. Recruiters can help get people, particularly neurodistinct individuals, into jobs that you could not get into by yourself because the recruiter has a more of a personal relationship. The only thing I say to watch out for is there are these big national recruiting firms where it's basically what I call dial and smile. They just blast out keyword search stuff and that's how they recruit. Not very effective, but in most cities, they're small, more boutique type recruiters where they get to know you as a person. I like to say they're the kind of place, if you go into it, the person who owns it probably is going to be sitting in an office right there. And they build relationships and they can be the best proponents for somebody that has challenges with interviewing because they can tell them ahead of time, this person, they kind of don't answer real quick. It takes them a little while to process, but just give them that chance, listen to them. And I think you'll find this person has amazing skills just like you need. And coming from somebody they already know, that means a lot more than if you tell it to them yourself. So recruiters, I think, is a huge, huge thing that we don't teach enough people how to utilize them well. And these are not recruiters that you pay for as the person looking for the job. These are recruiters that the employer pays for. So it doesn't cost you anything to have an expert at helping you get placed. And I actually have one for Neurodistinct that I'll recommend here. I'm just going to kind of jump through this one. We're going to get all the pieces in here so we can cover them quick. So a lot of people I see that are neurodistinct and particularly autistics that are neurodistinct autistics want to go after their dream job. And if they can't get their dream job, they don't want to get applied for any job whatsoever. And I think that is a major fallacy. It took me about 25 years in tech to get into the major company I'm in now. I didn't get in right away. So I think it's really important that you follow the steps of going through and building a career. And this ladder is just showing what are some common steps that you need to work through to build up a career. So I'm not going to go over all of them. You can read them on the slides, and I'm happy to share the slides so that they're available so you can look at them later. But it really comes down to when you start, you take any job you can get to start getting some resume experience. And then you start building experience, you start building a network, and then you can move up to bigger and better. And eventually you can get to your dream job. Are there a few people that get their dream job right off the bat? Yeah, there are a few people that do that, but I wouldn't want to count on it because we're talking in single-digit percentages and low single-digit percentages. Most of us have to work our way into the career and job that we really want. So the company I was going to mention for you that I would highly recommend for individuals who are neurodistinct and looking for a job is a company called Zavicon. And I won't go over all their marketing things. I'll just tell you kind of quickly about it. Their service-wise, they specialize in placing people who have disability. So not just neurodistinct, although the woman who is the founder and CEO is autistic herself. She also had started a company called MindSpark, actually trained, then hired autistic individuals to do QA work on software. She ran that for a number of years. She was bought out by a big international company, became the US president of the international company doing the same kind of thing, and now has moved back into recruiting, which was her original career. Except now it's recruiting, helping individuals that struggle through the recruiting process. So a wonderful person. If you go to my podcast, I did a podcast with her. You can learn a lot more, but I would highly recommend. And the company is just Zavicon, and it's zavicon.net is their website. And the slides here have the emails. And as I said, I'll pass a copy of the slides over so that you can distribute them. And that is it. It is time for questions and answer stuff.